this on? Okay, so welcome to my impromptu leatherworking panel, which we usually do in a much smaller area. It's kind of more of an interactive thing because leather's a very hands-on material. So I guess I'll probably just end up passing some stuff around, but if you guys want to come up and like look at stuff and touch it and get a feel for it, that is a-okay by me. I promise you can't hurt it. Oh, so cute. My name's Allegriana. I am a costumer and obviously leather worker. Um, I've been doing this for a couple years now. The blonde guy in the front right here is my partner in crime, Matthew. And together we have a company, Ribbons and Rivets, and we specialize in leather and leather costuming and interpreting people's very artistic versions of how they think leather functions in video games and trying to make that happen in real life. I'm sure anyone who's done any sort of anime or comic or video game costume has at some point been like, that's not how that works, like IRL, but that's fine. I'll make it work. And you do because you're magical. So today we're going to go over kind of a general overview of leatherworking. An hour is not really enough to get like super into the nitty gritty of like patterning and choosing materials and all this kind of stuff, but we'll try and do our best. I brought a whole bunch of stuff for you guys to check out and see the different uses for leather in a costume. It's a really versatile material, and one of the things that I really like about it is that you can incorporate it in a number of different ways, and it's a really sturdy, resilient thing to work with. This bad boy over here, this is called the Nightwalker. The chest plate for it is over 10 years old at this point. It has been rained on. It has been sweated in. It has been like, people have filmed short movies in it, and it is still doing really well because leather is a fantastic material that will never let you down. That's mostly true. Sometimes leather will frustrate you a great deal, but we'll get to that later. The other thing is that leather is it can be kind of intimidating to get started with, but the Nightwalker right there was actually made by Matt when he was in college and on a college student budget. So almost nothing. The reason it's got all the intricate little, weaving and all these parts is because it is not made out of a single large piece of leather. It's made out of a bunch of scrap pieces that were put together in the only way that they would fit. But it looks awesome. And so, that's one way to get started. You can go to Tandy, you can clear out their remnant scrap bin, and you can start cobbling stuff together. So, we have pretty much everything here from big, gigantic, crazy suit of armor to really simple stuff like a pair of bracers. This is like the easiest possible thing you can make. It's just a single piece of leather. It's been dyed and sealed and water molded, which is how it holds that shape. And I did this for my Azula costume. And so I guess if we're gonna talk about working with leather, then the easiest place to get started are the really simple shapes like this. So bracers, cuffs, even like chokers, and no, definitely not bras. Bras are super difficult. We'll get to that later. Boobs are tricky. But so you can start with something as basic as like this, this rectangle-ish shape. And a lot of our patterning, I didn't bring any pattern pieces. But a lot of our patterning starts with poster board. It's pretty easy to work with. It's cheap, and basically, if you can pattern it out of poster board and get it to stay together and get it to kind of bend to the shape you want, you can probably do that same thing with leather. And it saves you the time and heartbreak of cutting something out of leather, trying to shove it together, and then realizing, oh, it's not gonna do that. So all of our patterns start with just basic pieces of poster board, measurements, trying to figure out how everything's gonna sit. and then a lot of test fitting to see how it's going to sit on you. Leather is, I was going to say it's not a giving material, but I guess it depends on what weight of leather you're working with. But by and large, if you make something out of leather and it goes over your wrist isn't going to bend backwards for the rest of the day. And if it goes over your legs, your movement might be hindered for the rest of the day. And so, part of the fitting for any project is making sure that you're still going to be able to have that range of movement that you want in your costume, and that you'll, also be comfortable, be able to go to the bathroom, the little things like that. So let's see, I've got a couple more complicated bracer patterns here. So single piece, really easy. All of our stuff starts with undyed veg tan leather, which you can get from Tandy, and they love costumers. Oh, they love you because, first of all, because they know that you're going to get sucked into this hobby and you're going to be coming back repeatedly. But also because a lot of the people who work there are costumers themselves. They get really excited when people come in and they're looking on to start a new project or something. So actually, let me show you. I have a piece right here. There's a Tandy in Raleigh. It is off of Capitol Boulevard. I want to say it's Old Wake Forest, yeah. They are super familiar with costumers, and they're great. If you go in and ask them for advice on stuff, they can usually point you in the right direction. So this is what most of our leather starts out looking like. So that's undyed veg tan, not super thick. I don't do a lot of stuff that's like SCA armor grade because it's a pain to work with. Oh, thank you. You're the best. And so it starts like this and it ends like this. And in between, there's a whole bunch of finishing processes. A lot of our stuff gets water molded, so it'll hold the shape. A good example would be this crown right here, which, as you can see, Matt's put points into. And it's also got these little kind of folded bits that give it like an extra bit of dimension. I think I'm just gonna start passing stuff around because like holding it up, I'm like, you can see it like all the way in the back, right? So, and you can just toss that to people too. If it lands on the floor, you're like, it's fine, it's leather. Oh yeah, maybe like warn them before you fling the pointy crown into their face. And so this thing, which is the next thing that I'm going to send around, this is an example of all the different types of leather that you can work with and what they look like at different stages in the process. Starting out, you have the veg tan, which is, like I said, what most of our stuff starts with. You can get pre-dyed leather. I prefer to start with the undyed stuff because it gives you a lot more flexibility. And pre-dyed leather has usually been treated and is not going to do as much as the undyed stuff. So if you're looking to do a lot of like water molding, a lot of tooling, anything to really add more depth and detail to it, you definitely want to start with the veg tan stuff. Here's an example. Actually, we have a couple examples here of pre-dyed leather. This is chrome dyed. I'm going to pass this around so you guys can actually like see it and touch it and feel it. That looks great on you. So this is chrome dyed, and this is Latigo. These are both already dyed. As you can see, they're pretty thoroughly soaked. And they tend to be good for if you're doing very basic stuff like belts and straps on things. Because they're sturdy, they hold their color. Like I said, you're not going to be able to put a lot of detail into it, but you can still, attach it to things. And that's pretty good. So back to the veg tan stuff, which is what you will probably be working with most of the time. So starts like this. This is really hard to do one-handed. And as you can see, it's pretty flexible before you get into the whole nitty-gritty of treating it. Oh yeah. Hey. All right. We're smart. We got this. I mean, it doesn't really need to be that tall.
As tall as you get.
Yeah. Oh, it's already set up for short people. Perfect. All right. So just go in here. Mm, are we sure about that? Okay. All right. There we go. Can you like, a little bit? Yes. Perfect. Okay. Still good? Okay, cool. Ah, I have both hands and this is fantastic. Okay, so veg tan leather, bendy, flexible, like your canvas of unlimited possibilities. This is what it's going to start with. This is what it's going to look like when you are, laying it out, patterning it, cutting it out. There's a bunch of different things that we do to get it to look extremely finished and polished. One of those is called beveling. So when you cut leather, it has a hard edge to it, and this is a matter of preference. Some of you might want that hard edge for like a certain look. For a lot of the stuff we do, we like to roll off the edges because it's more comfortable to wear that way and it looks just a little bit nicer. So beveling is this process where you take this weird little sticky thing, which I have. So this is a beveler. It's got a little curvy bit here that goes on the leather, and then you run it along the edge, and it cuts the hard edge off, and it leaves you with this like nice rounded side to it that you can then go back and like dye over that. And then there's a second process. I don't know what the technical name for it is, but you use this little wheel called a slicker, and you run it over the edge of the leather, and that smooths all the fibers down and makes like this really nice, clean, rounded finish to your leather piece. Burnishing, thank you. I haven't had tea or breakfast yet, so yeah, you guys are going to be getting a very non-technical, this is the sticky thing, this is the slicky wheel. If you go to Tandy's website, they have the technical names for these things. Anyway, so when I pass this around, you'll get to see like the difference between just the raw cut edge, the beveled edge, and then what it looks like after it's been dyed and then burnished. And the burnished side, this is the most finished side of it, and it looks really good. And I think that's what everyone's leather should look like most of the time. Unless you're going for like a really rough, barbaric look, then like don't finish that at all. Just hack it to pieces, and throw it on your costume. So start it that way, I guess, because the other one went that way. Did you guys see anything? No? All right. There we go. Just keep it going around the room. Actually, I'm going to add a couple more things to that so there's like a constant circulation. And we are going to have like, 15 minutes at the end for like Q&A. Just come up and touch things and see everything. So I promise you'll get a good look at this stuff. Where was I? Oh, finishing processes, right. So like I said, the veg tan is, it's a really versatile material. And also, that's the stage before you, dye it and do all the crazy stuff to it. That's the stage where you can like start tooling it and put detail in it. You can also water mold it, which is, it's pretty much exactly what it sounds like. You get the leather wet, and then you mold it over something. And if you're trying to put shapes into it, boob shapes, this is how to do it. I'm not going to get too ranty about this, but it's a pet peeve of mine when people don't think of boobs as three-dimensional things, and they don't accommodate for that curve when they're doing stuff. I have made this mistake before, and I've been in possession of boobs for many years now. And you would think that I wouldn't make this mistake, but I did, and I regretted it. We have a couple examples up here of water molding. The best example is obviously any of the bra tops that have the curvature like warped into it. So this is the world's tiniest corset. And as you can see, it's got the cup shape, molded in. We basically used a mannequin and like sat on the mannequin and then like stretched everything over her. It looked very aggressive, but and it's a little bit more subtle. But the rest of the corset itself actually also had the same treatment, the water molding, and that's gonna help it keep this shape. So like you see, even when I kind of lay it out sort of flat, that it's still got that curvature into it, and that's gonna give it a more defined shape than just slapping it on your body, you know. I mean, I guess if you slapped it on your body while it was wet and then you let it dry, that would be impressive. Uncomfortable, probably, but yeah. So water molding, if you've worked with like Warbla or EVA foam or any of the thermoplastics, you're familiar with wanting to get that shape in there. Except with with leather, you can do that with water instead of heat. You can also heat leather. The SCA people have a slightly different process where they like boil the leather and make it like extra tough and hard. I think that's a little overkill for a costume, but if you're making a set of armor that you actually want to go out and fight in, that might be something to consider. So, corset coming your way. Yeah. Oh wait, no, that one's got stitching. We can talk about stitching too. Yeah. I'll send this other top around in lieu of the second corset. So okay, so now that we have zipped past the concept of water molding, how much time do I have? 11. Okay, like everything you need to know about leather in 1 hour or less. Got this. All right, so back to water molding. This is another one we're going to send around. This is a bra, very comfortable bra top. But as you can see, it too has been water molded, so it's got that cup shape in it. And unlike the corset that's somewhere around here, this one was not dyed on the back. And this is a matter of personal preference and also a little experimentation with dyes. Um, so leather dyes, no matter how well you seal them, have a tendency to work their way back out. The biggest culprit we found of this in our experience has been red. Red just does not want to stay on the leather. It wants to be everywhere. It wants to be on you. So we dyed the back of that corset, and then we've also started moving towards not dyeing the backs of things, as so to keep people from getting inexplicable like streaks of red on them. There's a lot of different, on the topic of dyes, there's a lot of different dyes available. Uh, really? I thought we stopped using that. Huh. Yeah. I do like. Okay, so this is an alcohol dye. There's three types of dyes, more or less. There's a water-based, an alcohol-based, and an oil-based. They all have sort of different pros and cons. The alcohol-based, if you've ever experimented with alcohol-based makeup, the alcohol-based dye has overall the best stain power. It goes on. It's a very immediate, quick drying dye. Really good for if you're very certain that you want this thing to be like one solid color, and that's the color you want it to be forever. You can also airbrush them, which is maybe a little bit more high level than we need to get into. But leatherworking is a really old traditional art, and recently there's a whole bunch of new ways to do stuff. I'm sure you guys have seen like people who use laser cutters, for example, to engrave onto leather. Or I saw someone who 3D printed their own custom leather stamps so they could, do this like really specific design for a cosplay they were doing. Airbrushing is, a relatively new technique, but it's a really, really neat way to get dye onto your leather. It's not absolutely necessary, like I said. Leatherworking's been around for a while, and it is completely, completely fine to just, brush that stuff on by hand. Tandy uses these, or they have these little daubers. They're just little sticks with, kind of felty part on the end, and you dip it in the dye, and then you run it over the leather. It's really simple, but like I was saying with the alcohol dyes, they dry really fast. So when you're working with that, you have to move pretty quickly, or you end up with something that's like kind of streaky. Uh, the water-based dyes they're more forgiving, they're slower, they take a little bit longer to dry. They can also be used, like you can use dyes to help you with your molding, especially the water-based one, which, like I said, takes a bit longer to dry. The colors tend to be a little bit less vibrant, but they're still very pretty. And you can mix them to get, different variations on things. And then you have the oil-based dyes, which are weird, and I don't use them a lot. There's some nice ones, and I guess the benefit of that is they tend to be a little bit nicer to the leather. After you dye stuff, one of the next steps available to you is to oil it, and that's just a luxury treatment for the leather. It keeps the skin looking nicer. I mean, leather is fundamentally skin. Your skin likes oil, leather likes oil. But it keeps it nicer, more flexible. It keeps the surface from, cracking. There's so many Dobby things in this. And so, the oil-based dyes, since it's oil-based, it's already got that in it. It's tends to be like a more conditioning treatment for the leather, as opposed to the water-based and alcohol-based dyes, which dry it out and may need to be oiled again after you finish. Oiling does change the color of the leather. It makes things darker and richer, which in some cases may be great if you're working on a piece and you're like, this green came out kind of pale, and then you go back over it and oil it, and it comes out being like a darker, nicer, deeper green. That's fantastic. If you are not, if you're really happy with how your color looks, and then you're like, I still have to oil this, prepare for it to get darker. Sorry about that. It's just how it works. All right, so this one also going around. Oh, and yes.
A lot of guys go buy pre-buy stuff like stuff like that. Get them wet, dyes come off like a can. Is one better than the other to stop that type of stuff from happening? Not getting leather.
So, in theory, the alcohol and the oil-based dyes are going to be less water soluble. But it also kind of depends on how you finish the leather, in terms of what kind of sealant you put on it. We use acrylic resin for a lot of stuff because it's really shiny and pretty. It's had moderate success with keeping the dyes from running, but like I said, there's a bit of experimentation that goes into that. So far, we've still not figured out how to not make red dye run when it gets wet. It just does. The other thing you can consider is sort of pre-washing it to see what's going to come back out. I wouldn't do this with a water-based dye because everything's going to come back out, but if you're concerned about it, if you've got an alcohol-based dye, you can run water over it and see what's gonna go ahead and run, and then let that dry, oil it, seal it, and hopefully that will be a little bit more permanent and stable. Yeah. So, and the dyeing, oiling, finishing process also changes the texture, the feel of the leather. This is a really great example because you can feel the underside of the leather where it's not been dyed, and then you can feel the outside, and you'll see what a difference that is. It's something to think about when you're building your piece, if you want, what's up against your skin to be this, or if you want it to be this, which will make sense when you touch this. I feel a little bit like Oprah, you get leather, you get leather, you get a bra top. Which one? That one? Oh, the little one? Okay, so gonna send this one around also. If you get a chance to touch both of them, you'll notice that they're made out of two different thicknesses of leather. That one is considerably thicker. It's sturdier. It holds its shape better. This is a really, really thin piece. Bless its heart. I think we made it out of almost fabric at this point, honestly. But the neat thing about this one is I did a lot of tooling on this, like a lot. And the dye is also airbrushed on, so it's got kind of a gradient look. You can see that it's darker towards the center and the edges, lighter around the middle. And then there's a bunch of tooling on it, tooling and stamping. And those were filled in with gold paint to give it a little bit more of a highlight. And the back of it, again, wasn't dyed because this was going to be up against skin and it's red, so we didn't feel like dealing with that. But you can again feel the difference in texture, and kind of see uh, the end result of like all these different finishing processes that I've been talking about. It's really floppy. Um, yes. I mean, I thought it was pretty comfortable. But it's not exactly to my size, so I probably would have thought it was comfortable no matter what. So I was like, oh, this is so like easy to wear, 'cause it doesn't actually fit. It kind of depends what you're doing, 'cause like for example, that one, which is very like sort of loose and floppy, it's got good movement, like it's easy to wear. It's a little bit less supportive than some of the stiffer ones, but it has more give. So when you breathe, for example, you're not fighting this like leather thing that's constricting you. It does depend on like the overall look that you're going for, because if you want something really sturdy, if you're trying to convey the impression of like, a rigid armor, that's not going to do it very well, because it's very thin, like mask thin. All right, where was I? Okay, so we have covered in very rapid succession leather. Oh, you know what? I didn't go into tooling. We'll do that. We'll do that now, and then we'll talk about how to like put stuff together. And this is a really like this is a speed run of like leatherworking. So if you have questions, like specific questions, towards the end of the panel, I'll be happy to get to those. And there's also some really good resources online. Tandy has a bunch of stuff. They've been moving towards kind of courting the cosplay community a little bit more, and I know they're working towards getting some more tutorials and stuff up to help people understand like how to go from like step A, dead cow, to step Z, beautiful finished award-winning armor set. Okay, so tooling, another one of the advantages of choosing an undyed, veg tan leather piece. Tooling is the process by which you violently attack the leather until it has the patterns and designs in it that you want. There's a couple different ways you can do this. A lot of the stuff on that bra, for example, all of the viney, swirly bits was all freehand. So man, you guys are not gonna be able to see anything. So this is a probe. It's basically it's a stick with a pointy end and a flat end, like a spatula. This is one of the things that you use for gouging designs into leather. The way I do a lot of my stuff is I will sort of trace over you get the leather wet, not too wet. You'll find when you're working with leather, there's kind of a happy medium where it's like just wet enough that it's like willing to like, compress when you poke it with pointy tools, or adjust to like a different shape if you're trying to shape it over, if you're trying to shape it over a form to give it, whatever final piece you're going for. If you get the leather too wet, it just gets like floppy and useless, and it won't do anything. Like it'll hold a shape, and then as soon as you move it off the form, it'll immediately lose the shape. So it's kind of like it's a halfway point where it's damp. So you have your leather, you get your leather damp, you trace the pattern that you're trying to put onto it, and then you go back over and you can engrave it, you can stamp on it. There's a couple different tools for doing this, which I have in this toolbox up here. I'm gonna show them to you, but again, this will probably make more sense when you actually like come see it up close. I'm not gonna be throwing these at people. These will all just stay in the toolbox, and we can come check it out at the end of the panel, because I feel like if I pass this around, Like at some point, I'm gonna be like, where was that one thing that I really needed for a project? And it'll just be like on the hotel floor somewhere.
Now, what does a basic set of tools normally run?
Depends on what you want to do. So the Nightwalker, going back to our classic example of college student ingenuity, the Nightwalker was put together with like less than $100 of materials and tools. I think. What did you have, Matt? You had a like an X-Acto knife, a pair of scissors.
That was made with an X-Acto knife, a beveler, a slicker, and a hammer. That's it.
And a bunch of scrap cow. Yeah, so you can start out with like a pretty rudimentary set of tools. Once you start getting a little bit deeper into like the tooling, the engraving, there's a lot of specialty parts that you're gonna end up getting. So which is how Tandy gets you. Um, but I mean, you can start out with a really basic kit. I would say you need leather shears, which are a specific type of scissors used for cutting leather. They're serrated, which gets through the fiber of leather a little bit easier. Um, X-Acto knife, always helpful. Um, Man, I mean, actually, that's really all you need for. Oh, and a hole punch. Yeah, that's another thing. I don't think I have one with me. Um, yeah, it's a leather hole punch. It is not a paper hole punch. That's a great route to like misery and despair. Yeah, yeah. Funny you should ask. I had this just in reserve for talking about how we stick leather together. So another thing you might want to have in your leather toolkit, besides the aforementioned shears, rotary hole punch, hammer, is some sewing gear because you can stitch leather together. The main methods of getting leather to stay together are rivets, which you have probably already seen at this point. They're the shiny little round things that, I mean, they function the same way a staple does. It's not a very elegant method of holding things together, but it is so functional. Um, rivets, rivets, right? And then the other thing you can do is you can stitch it together. Now, rivets are so they're very obvious. It's difficult to hide a rivet. Stitching is more subtle, and I'm gonna pass this around, I promise. It's a little bit, I think it's cleaner looking because you don't have like all this metal like all over your thing, and you also don't have to overlap, pieces of leather. So when you're riveting something, it's two pieces of leather on top of each other jammed together. With stitching, you can, just kind of butt them up against each other and then stitch it, right? So again, this is a good thing to have in your toolkit. You'll need an awl for punching holes. You'll need leather needles, which are terrifying. And you'll need thread. This is a wax thread. We get a lot of this stuff from Tandy. So, if you ever want to swing by there, they do sell a lot of like basic kits, intro to leatherworking type stuff. And you can pick up like a basic sewing kit and experiment with this. The disadvantage of hand stitching on leather is that it takes a long time and it is very tedious, and you have to be very like precise and pull the thread really tightly. Um, Whereas with rivets, we have a rivet press, which is one of the greatest things ever. And you put the thing in, you put the rivet in, you press it, and you're done. And it's a lot simpler. But depending on the kind of look you're going for, if you're like recreating something and it doesn't have a bunch of metal all over it, stitching is going to be your way to go. There's also, passing this around, there's also glues that you can use for leather. I would not bet on that holding together if you are trying to use that as like, a seam or something. Like I would never glue a corset together or glue a suit of armor together because you're asking for wardrobe malfunctions at that point. Okay, so let's see. Was it pretty industrial looking? Did it look like it could sew through a human being? So there are, as you just mentioned, there are leather sewing machines. Um, they're expensive. They are fiendishly expensive because they do an incredible job. Um, one of our friends who also does historical costuming, invested in one, and we went over to his shop and put like 3 pieces of 10-ounce leather together, and it just ran through the sewing machine like we had put tissue paper in there. So they're also dangerous. They're very that thing will go through you. So uh, probably not something we're really gonna get into. We don't have a leather sewing machine yet, but it's on the list of things we'd like. Uh, Definitely, you don't need that at the intro level though. You can get away with hand stitching. It's tedious, but it's pretty straightforward. Oh, Matt wants you all to know that each one of the seams on the corset took about 40 minutes. And he's been doing this for a while, so that should give you an idea of how tedious it is exactly. You can also do decorative stitching, which I enjoy. Do you have your hand raised? Yes. Did you miss the first part of the panel? Oh, yeah, we went into that a little bit. Hang on, I've got a little piece right here.
I used to work in an orthotic shop, and we cut up leather for prostheses and such.
Oh, neat.
And that's how we shaped it.
Yes, yeah. We do the same thing. You get it wet and then you either mold it around an existing shape or pinch it a whole lot. There's not really fold it, pinch it. Yes. Okay. Did everybody hear that? No. Okay. She was asking what is the difference between starting with veg tan leather and starting with a leather that's already been, you know, dyed, treated, sealed. What are the limitations of that? And so we kind of already went into everything you can do with veg tan. With leather that's already been dyed and treated and sealed, like I said, your options are limited. You can cut it, definitely. Whether or not it's going to take any sort of water molding after that is kind of up to the process, like the treatment that the leather received before it came to you. We've had some luck with soaking Latigo and putting it through an embossing machine. It's not great, but it definitely it'll still take a limited amount of shape. I wonder if I have any of that here actually. Matt, any word? You can. I'm not going to say that you can't, but it's not going to look the same as if you did it to a piece of veg tan. So if the detail is important, then I would just go with veg tan. Yeah, that's too bad. We have an embossing machine. It's pretty cool. It's basically a wheel, a brass wheel. It has a pattern into it, and you take your strip of leather and you run it through the machine. You have to crank it, and we were able, like I said, we were able to get some of our pre-dyed stuff to take the pattern from the embossing machine. But I've never tried hand stamping pre-dyed stuff because I don't think it would be worth it at that point. Yeah, it doesn't take the detail as heavily. So it has the pattern, but it's much fainter. It still looks nice. I will give it that. But it doesn't take it. And I also we haven't had it for that long, but I'm gonna bet that it's not gonna keep the pattern as long either. That's gonna be sort of like gradually working its way back out. Okay, so yes. Yeah, yeah, garment weight leather, which is exactly nothing we have up here. Yeah, that bra top is pretty close. Shoot, I should have brought some. I have a little bit at home. Oh yeah, man, this thing. So this is almost garment leather. Oh hey, thank you. All right, so this is garment weight leather. It's basically fabric at this point. It's not exactly fabric because it will be crueler to your sewing machine than fabric will. But it can be sewn. We have run it through like a really basic sewing machine, and it worked all right. We had to use denim needles, but aside from that, it worked pretty well. Um, we don't do a ton of work with this stuff, so I can kind of answer questions about it, but it's like I said, it's akin to fabric, so you're not going to be able to do this kind of stuff out of it, but it's good for strapping. It's good for soft corsets, soft bodices. Um, yeah, yeah. He was asking if it's going to hold detail from stamps, like the way you can get leather wet and do the stamping on and stuff. We've occasionally managed to stamp stuff onto it. I think the most success we had has been with just straight up cutting the detail into it. You can also burn it is another option if you have like a hot knife or something. And but it's really thin, so it's there's just not a whole lot you can really do, and you're gonna have to be careful that you don't sever it while you're working with it. Not really, no. This it doesn't really water form. A little bit, yeah. Okay, so his question was about the thickness of leather, how you choose, what weight that you want to work with. Um, Matt just vanished to the back of the room. I was going to pawn this question off on him. Do you want to loop back around? Okay. So we we have kind of a general set of guidelines that we work with when it comes to leather thickness. Matt. Yeah, I tried to make him write this down at one point so I could keep track of it, but he kept it all in his head. So
Generally speaking, we try to use about 8 to 10 ounce. It's thick enough to look rigid and heavy duty, but thin enough that you can also work it pretty easily. Not to mention if you're doing a lot of overlapping with the rivets, if you overlap 3 pieces of it, if each one of them's 12 or 14 ounce, by the time you're done, it's that thick. And so if you're trying to make something that looks that you can move in it and whatnot, that's probably not the route that you want to go. But probably the thinnest you would want to go for armor pieces would be about 8 ounce, unless you're going to be doing a lot of overlapping. The Nightwalker over there is about 7-8, so it can overlap pretty well and at the same time look rigid by itself, whereas the pieces she's got in her hand are about 10 to 12. That's about 10 to 12. Oh, I just passed them around. There you go. Those should be about 14 to 16. And we give you that range because ounce is kind of a very imprecise way of gauging thickness. 1 ounce leather is roughly 1/64th of an inch. And that can be kind of hard to gauge, especially when you're talking about skin, where it doesn't actually stay the same thickness the whole duration. It kind of gets thinner and thicker depending on which part of the body it comes from. Or cow body, let me specify there.
Thank you. Did that kind of cover it? 8 to 10 is a really good range to work in. It's thick enough that you can, tool it and put detail in it, and it still looks, impressive, intimidating. But it's not so thick that it's a real pain in the butt to work with. Like he mentioned, these are about a 14 to 16 ounce. One of the most aggravating pieces I've ever worked with. It was a pain in the butt to tool, it was a pain in the butt to cut. Everything about it was aggravating, but the person who commissioned them wanted really, really thick bracers, and so that's what we had to work with. They wanted really, really thick bracers because they were going to be swimming with sharks in these. Yep. I will say in their defense, they were doing a documentary about sharks and sort of trying to dispel some of the myths about sharks being these like vicious, bloodthirsty, man-eating beasts. And so there's actually a video of these being worn by this lady who's swimming with tiger sharks, and it is one of the coolest freaking things I've ever seen. And the bracers came back no worse for the wear. The dye was a little weird looking after that. No lie, saltwater is a cruel mistress, but other than that, no shark bites, so. Yeah, an honorary, like a candidate for a Darwin Award. Okay, so if hmm So the question was about the care and keeping of leather, and if you're Matt and you have this beautiful suit of armor, right, and you want to take care of this because this is your baby and you've had it for 10 years, you let it get entirely rained on and then you throw it into a plastic tote bin for a month and don't take it out, and then take it out and you're like, I don't remember this armor being white and fuzzy. Which is to say, armor leather is it's resilient, but it's also porous. So leather, there's a lot of stuff you can do to look after a piece of leather. I would say that the primary one is don't let it get wet and then stick it in a sealed container for a month. But you can always re-oil, re-dye, and re-seal parts of it. We've done that many times. This guy's probably due for some TLC. And there's leather conditioning treatments that you can get. Not quite the same thing you'd use on a coat. Like when we oil the leather, like we have a gallon of oil that we're just kind of like smearing all over it. It's not a very delicate process. It's not Crisco, no. It's called neat's foot oil, and it's a calf's foot oil. If anyone in here is vegan, I apologize. You're probably in the wrong panel. But this is all about working with animals and animal byproducts. So, Snow Seal is actually what we used on these because I went to Tandy and I was like, hey, I have something that's gonna go in salt water. How do I keep it alive? And they recommended Snow Seal, which is like sort of extra protection against water. Yeah, it's wax based, and it worked, I think, pretty well for this stuff. I'll pass these around again if people want to take a look at it. They started out as like a very solid blue, like Yeah, they're very dark, and in some places you can see the dye has kind of come away from it. But the leather itself is still in really good condition, which I think is in large part thanks to the snow seal. These were also very heavily oiled um, before we sent them out. So just send one in like either direction. Like throw it. Yeah. Yeah. And then by and large, once you have your finished piece of leather, if it gets wet, if it gets something on it, if assuming that you've gone ahead and sealed it, you can probably just wipe it back off with like soap and water. Um, undyed leather, fake. I mean that will soak up anything. So if you get something on that, good luck. Um, I guess soap and water and lots of prayers. But dyed, sealed, oiled leather is really, really hardy stuff. Again, one of the reasons I love working with it. Oh yeah, hang it up somewhere dry, airy, not humid. Not humid would be ideal. Okay, so that actually kind of takes us back into tooling and stamping. And so there's a couple different ways you can do this. There are pre-made stamps that you can buy. These are all from Tandy. This is from their rose set, I guess. I don't know. I went crazy and bought a bunch of these because they had roses on them, and I'm a sucker. Uh, but so these are already made, and they're very straightforward. You put it down, you hit it. The impression is in the leather. If you're me, you put it down, you hit it, then you hit it again like 8 times with increasing anger because you're very weak, and you want that impression to be in there. But and then they also have a different type of stamp, a little bit bigger. This one has a piece that goes in right here. I'm gonna use my mic stand again. Hopefully. Sorry, guys. Okay, so this one has interchangeable stamp pieces. It goes in there, and then you hit it with a mallet. The mallets for these they're not hammers. They're like rubber type mallets. And the technical name for them is a maul, which is ferocious. These are my mauls, and they have names. This one is Darth, and this one is Malnir. Thank you for politely laughing at that. I'm really proud of those names. Right, so these are the mauls. As you can see, they have I believe this is a nylon head, and that's to just save your stamps and keep them lasting a little longer. We've found through painful experience that if you hit them with an actual hammer, it will work, but it will slowly over time mushroom out the head of your stamp. And it's nice to be nice to your tools, so invest in some good mauls. But these are not, this is not, you don't need to have this like from day one. This is more something that you would purchase when you're like, oh, I really want to get into like tooling and stamping on leather, and you use these for a bit. You can also not get the ones from Tandy because they're a little overpriced. Any sort of rubber mallet, with a soft head, not a metal head, will do just as fine. So, like I said, so you've got all these pre-made stamps that you can get from Tandy, and you can also get patterns. I feel like I have to keep facing this way to speak into the mic, but I want you to know I'm thinking about you as I answer this question. And you can also get patterns. Tandy sells those as well. You can get them online. And those will help you sort of lay out your leather piece. You trace the pattern basically onto the piece of leather, and then you go back in and engrave it or tool it. You can freehand stuff, which is what I do a lot because I like that. And you can also print your own designs out onto what's called tracing paper, It's a clear paper that you can just put into your printer. It's one of the niftiest things. Um, and on one side, it's like very slick and smooth, and on the other side, it's got like just a little bit of fuzz. And print designs, like so you could download, if you wanted to do a Pikachu, for example, you could download like the line art of a Pikachu, print it onto the tracing paper, and then put the tracing paper over a piece of leather, and then engrave that into the leather. So those are like the different ways that you can do stuff. You can also laser engrave stuff if you have access to a laser cutter. If you bought a Glowforge and you have yet to receive it, not speaking from any sort of painful experience here, but you can actually cut stuff into like, laser. The big trick there is to figure out good settings for the machine so that you are cutting it in and not scorching the entire piece of leather or burning straight through it to the center of the earth. Kind of your two problems there. The Glowforge is a beautiful dream that we realized. The Glowforge was a really cool thing that they were doing on Kickstarter. Is that 5 minutes? Thanks. And it's a desktop-sized laser cutter. Like it's the size of like a home printer. And it is supposed to have like a sensor that automatically detects the material you're working with and the thickness of it and adjusts based on what you're trying to do. It's wireless. You can input different patterns into it. You can scan stuff. It's a really, really cool piece of tech. We backed it, and we've been waiting on our investment to come back. But if it does, we'll have something really cool to show you guys the next time around. Okay, so I just got the 5-minute warning. So we can keep doing Q&A, but I'd really like for you guys to just come up and take a look at some of the stuff. Toolbox is right here. Armor's over here. Just come up and look at it. Feel free to ask questions, and definitely feel free to like pick it up, look at it, turn it around, kind of see how it's made. Because, thank you. Because to me that's one of the best ways to learn about new stuff, especially new materials. So, come on up. I'm gonna be grabbing all the. If you have leather stuff that belongs to me, maybe bring it also back up here. That would be great. And if you have any more questions. Thank you. Thank you so much.